The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the polished teak deck in a spray of crystal and golden liquid. The elegant woman in the Navy Cruise Line uniform stood before us, her professionally whitened smile faltering as she registered my husband's sudden pallor. "Mr. Reynolds, welcome back. It's so wonderful to see you again." Her voice was warm, practiced, the kind of greeting reserved for valued returning guests. But I had never been on a cruise before. This was supposed to be our first voyage together. Mark's hand found my elbow, gripping too tightly, his laugh emerging strained and hollow. "She must have me confused with someone else, honey." But the concierge's eyes flickered with confusion, then understanding, then something that looked uncomfortably like pity as she glanced at me. In that crystalline moment, as the Atlantic wind whipped my hair across my face and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, I felt the first tremor of an earthquake that would shatter the foundation of everything I thought I knew. The sound of the shattering glass seemed to echo in my ears long after the steward rushed to clean it up, murmuring apologies as if I had been the one at fault. I watched him sweep the fragments into a dustpan, each glittering shard catching the late afternoon light like tiny accusatory mirrors. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in the pulse point at my temple that always throbbed when stress threatened to overwhelm me. The concierge had already retreated, her professional composure recovered, moving on to greet other boarding passengers with that same practiced warmth. But her words hung in the air between Mark and me like smoke, acrid and impossible to disperse. "Are you all right?" Mark's voice was carefully modulated, his hand still on my elbow but gentler now, as if handling something fragile that might break further. His face showed concern, but there was something else beneath it, something I couldn't quite name, but that made my stomach clench with instinctive dread. "You look pale. Maybe we should get you to the cabin, let you rest before dinner." I nodded mutely, not trusting my voice, and allowed him to guide me through the crowd of excited travelers. The ship was enormous, a floating city of polished brass and rich mahogany, of laughter and anticipation, and people embarking on what they believed would be perfect vacations. I felt disconnected from all of it, as if I were watching the scene through thick glass, present but not part of the celebration surrounding us. 3 months earlier, our Brooklyn brownstone had been filled with the amber light of late afternoon. Streaming through the bay windows onto the hardwood floors, Mark and I had refinished together during our first year of marriage. 23 years. 23 years of Sunday morning pancakes, of his hand finding mine across crowded subway cars, of believing in the fairy tale we had constructed brick by careful brick. The travel brochure sat on our kitchen counter, glossy pages featuring impossibly blue water and couples gazing adoringly at sunsets. "We need this," Mark had said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I stood at the sink. "Just you and me. Remember when we used to dream about traveling the world?" His breath was warm against my neck, familiar, safe. I leaned back into him, ignoring the small voice that whispered about the increasing late nights at the office, the phone calls he took in another room, the way he had started showering immediately upon coming home. I remember thinking, in that moment before everything changed, that maybe this cruise would fix whatever had been slowly unraveling between us. The emotional distance that had crept in so gradually I couldn't pinpoint when it started. The way conversations had become surface level, discussing logistics and schedules instead of dreams and desires. The decrease in physical intimacy, explained away by stress and age, and the natural evolution of long-term relationships. I had blamed myself, wondered if I had become boring, if I had let myself go, if I wasn't trying hard enough to keep the spark alive. The magazines I read were full of advice about keeping your marriage fresh, about the importance of date nights and lingerie and not nagging. I had absorbed all of it, internalized the message that if my husband was distant, it must be because I wasn't doing enough. The brownstone had become my entire world in ways I hadn't fully recognized until much later. When Mark worked late, I would walk through the rooms we had decorated together, touching the furniture we had chosen, looking at the photographs documenting our life. Our wedding day, both of us so young and certain. Vacations to places we could barely afford in those early years. Holidays with both our families before his parents passed away. The absence of children was notable in those photographs, a gap that used to hurt, but that I had learned to accept. We had tried for years, endured the tests and the treatments and the monthly disappointments until finally agreeing to stop, to accept that it would be just the two of us. Mark had held me that night, stroked my hair, promised me that we would be enough for each other. I had believed him completely. I found the receipt 2 weeks before our departure. It fluttered from the pocket of his gray cashmere jacket as I prepared it for dry cleaning, a slip of paper from Tiffany's on Fifth Avenue. $3,247. My heart had performed a strange little skip, imagining the anniversary gift waiting in some hidden drawer, the surprise he was planning. But our anniversary had passed 6 months prior, marked only by a hurried dinner at our usual Italian place in Park Slope because Mark had a morning meeting. I held that receipt between my fingers, studying the date, the itemized description too blurred to read, and felt the first hairline fracture appear in the smooth surface of my trust. The receipt became a talisman of sorts, something I would take out and examine when Mark wasn't home, as if studying it long enough would reveal its secrets. I memorized every detail. The date, March 15th, a Thursday, a day when Mark had told me he was showing properties to a high-net-worth client. The time, 2:17 in the afternoon. The item description was partially smudged, but I could make out custom and what looked like necklace. I imagined scenarios that would explain it innocently. Maybe he was planning a surprise for our next anniversary. Maybe he had purchased it as an investment. Maybe his explanation about buying it for Robert's wife was true, even though Robert had been divorced for 3 years, something Mark either didn't know or had conveniently forgotten. The weight of that receipt in my pocket became physical, a constant reminder that something in my world had shifted slightly off its axis. I found myself watching Mark more carefully, noticing things I had previously overlooked or dismissed. The way he angled his phone screen away from me when checking messages. The slight pause before answering when I asked about his day. The new cologne he had started wearing, spicier and more expensive than his usual brand. The gym membership he had suddenly renewed after years of claiming he got enough exercise walking around the city showing properties. Each observation added another piece to a puzzle I didn't want to be assembling. The Brooklyn streets were beginning to bloom with spring as I walked to meet Sarah at our favorite coffee shop in Cobble Hill. The air smelled of possibility, of new beginnings, of the earth warming and coming back to life. Cherry blossoms lined the sidewalks, their delicate petals drifting down like pink snow. And I found myself thinking about impermanence, about how beautiful things don't last, about the Buddhist concept of attachment being the root of suffering. Sarah was already at our usual table when I arrived, her red hair caught up in a messy bun, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed something on her laptop. She looked up as I approached, and her expression immediately shifted from casual to concerned. "What happened?" she asked, closing her laptop and giving me her full attention. She took one look at my face and pushed a latte across the scarred wooden table. "What happened?" Sarah had been my best friend since college, the maid of honor at my wedding, the godmother to the children Mark and I had never managed to have. I showed her the receipt. She frowned, turning it over in her capable hands. Her fingernails painted a defiant purple that I had always admired, but never had the courage to wear myself. "Did you ask him about it?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications we were both afraid to voice. Of course I had asked him. That evening, as he loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch, I had approached the conversation carefully, lightly, not wanting to seem accusatory. The ritual of his homecoming was always the same. Briefcase on the chair by the door, jacket hung in the closet, tie loosened, scotch poured. 2 fingers of Macallan, neat, in the crystal tumbler we had received as a wedding gift. I had timed my question for after he had taken his first sip, when he was beginning to relax from his day. "Honey, I found this receipt in your jacket. It's quite expensive." He barely glanced at it, his eyes scanning the paper with what appeared to be genuine indifference. "Oh, that. Robert asked me to pick up something for his wife. Anniversary gift. He's hopeless at that sort of thing." His explanation was smooth, delivered without hesitation, accompanied by that charming smile that had first captured my attention at a gallery opening in Soho all those years ago. "I'll expense it to him next week." He kissed my forehead, and I felt foolish for even asking. But something cold had settled in my stomach, something that tasted like doubt. "Robert's been divorced for 3 years," Sarah said flatly, voicing what I had been trying not to think. She set the receipt down on the table between us with the care of someone handling evidence. "Mark knows that. We were at Robert's divorce party. He gave a speech about how Robert was better off, remember?" I did remember. It had been at a bar in Manhattan, Robert getting progressively drunker and more emotional, Mark keeping things light with jokes and anecdotes, being the good friend who lifts spirits and keeps the evening from becoming maudlin. The memory felt contaminated now, like everything else, viewed through a lens of suspicion that changed its meaning. "I know you're screaming at your screen right now, telling me to dig deeper, to trust my instincts. But when you've built a life with someone, when you've memorized the sound of their breathing in the dark and the way they take their coffee, the idea that they might be lying feels like questioning gravity itself. Love isn't blind. Love is paralyzed by its own investment, frozen by the terror of what truth might cost." Every morning for 23 years I had woken up next to this man. I knew that he snored slightly when he slept on his back, that he liked his coffee black with 1 sugar, that he read the financial section of the Times before the front page, that he had a scar on his left knee from a childhood bicycle accident. How could someone you know that intimately be a stranger? How could the thousands of small, mundane moments of daily life coexist with fundamental deception? Sarah reached across the table and gripped my hand. "Listen to me carefully, Linda. Your gut is telling you something is wrong. Don't ignore it. Don't talk yourself out of what you're feeling." Her green eyes were fierce, protective, the way they had been in college when she defended me from a boyfriend who had tried to gaslight me about his behavior. That had been my first real lesson in how men could manipulate reality, could make you doubt your own perceptions, could rewrite history to serve their narrative. I had thought I learned that lesson, had thought I would never again be the woman who questioned her own sanity rather than her partner's honesty. Yet here I was, decades later, doing exactly that. The dinner party happened 3 days before our cruise departure. Mark's colleague James and his wife hosted at their renovated loft in Williamsburg, exposed brick and industrial lighting creating shadows that seemed deeper than usual. The space was beautiful, the kind of carefully curated environment that appeared in architectural magazines, with furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable, and abstract art that probably cost more than my car. James worked with Mark at the financial advisory firm, and his wife Rebecca was a curator at a modern art gallery in Chelsea. They were the kind of couple that made you feel simultaneously impressed and inadequate, their lives appearing effortlessly perfect from the outside. The conversation flowed with wine, harmless chatter about real estate prices, and the latest Broadway shows. Rebecca served a 5-course meal she had apparently prepared herself, each dish more elaborate than the last. And I found myself wondering when she found the time between her demanding career and her 2 children and this spotless apartment that showed no evidence that children lived there. The other guests were couples from Mark's work circle, people we saw at company events but didn't know intimately. I was making appropriate conversation with a woman named Diane about her recent kitchen renovation when I heard James mention something that made my blood run cold. Then James mentioned a conference Mark had attended in Miami the previous month. That hotel was incredible, wasn't it? Sarah, you should see the infinity pool overlooking the ocean. He was gesturing enthusiastically, clearly several glasses of wine into the evening. I told Rebecca we need to plan a vacation there. Mark, you have to give me the name of that restaurant you recommended, the one right on the beach. Mark's fork paused halfway to his mouth for just a fraction of a second. His face remained neutral, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, a calculation happening in real time. The Fontainebleau, right? Best business trip I've had in years. His voice was casual, agreeable, as if confirming something obvious. I felt the room tilt slightly. The wine in my glass seemed to shimmer and distort. The conversation around me became muffled, as if I were underwater. Mark had told me he was in Chicago that week. I had called the hotel he claimed to be staying at, left a message at the front desk because his cell phone was supposedly dying. The Chicago Drake Hotel. I remembered because the receptionist had been so friendly, had promised to deliver my message personally. Mark had called me back 20 minutes later, apologizing for the dead phone, asking about my day, complaining about the cold Chicago wind. I gripped my fork tighter, using the physical sensation of metal against palm to anchor myself in reality. Miami was not Chicago. The Fontainebleau was not the Drake. This was not a small discrepancy or a memory lapse. This was a fundamental contradiction that could not be explained away by confusion or innocent mistake. I felt Diane looking at me expectantly, realized she had asked me a question that I hadn't heard. I'm sorry, what was that? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too high and tight. She repeated something about cabinet hardware, and I responded on autopilot, my conscious mind entirely occupied with the implications of what I had just learned. The metallic taste of panic filled my mouth as I smiled and nodded through the rest of dinner, my mind racing through implications I wasn't ready to face. Each course seemed to last an eternity. The braised short ribs that Rebecca had spent hours preparing turned to ash in my mouth. The carefully selected wine pairing tasted like vinegar. I watched Mark from across the table, saw him laughing at James's jokes, discussing investment strategies with another guest, playing the role of successful professional and devoted husband with such natural ease that I began to doubt what I had heard. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe James had said Miami but meant Chicago. Maybe Mark had been in Miami for a different trip, and I had confused the timing. But no, the timeline was clear in my mind because I had marked his Chicago trip on our shared calendar, had planned my week around his absence. In the bathroom, I gripped the edge of the marble sink and stared at my reflection. The mirror was surrounded by those expensive Edison bulbs that are supposed to provide flattering light, but all I could see were the lines around my eyes, the threads of gray beginning to show in my hair, the exhaustion etched into my features. 48 years old, laugh lines just beginning to deepen at the corners of my eyes. The same brown hair I'd worn in the same style for decades because Mark said he loved it. When had I stopped recognizing myself? When had I become this woman who swallowed lies with her wine and smiled through her own erasure? The stranger in the mirror looked small, diminished, like a sketch of a person rather than a fully realized being. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and searched for the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. The website loaded, showing a gleaming Art Deco masterpiece right on the beach, exactly as James had described. I navigated to their restaurant listings, found the beachfront dining James must have been referring to. The photos showed sunset views and elegant tables and couples looking romantically into each other's eyes. I imagined Mark there, imagined him not alone, but with someone else. Imagined him creating memories in a place I didn't know he had been. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in, the air too thick to breathe properly. That night, after Mark fell asleep, I lay awake in the darkness of our bedroom, listening to the distant sounds of the city, the hum of traffic on Atlantic Avenue, the wail of a siren somewhere in the distance, the steady rhythm of my husband's breathing beside me. Each sound felt amplified, pressing down on my chest. I thought about the receipt, about Miami versus Chicago, about the cruise ship concierge's face frozen in that moment of recognition. Small things, explainable things. Or were they the scattered pieces of a puzzle I had been too afraid to assemble? A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over, becomes part of your landscape, changes the geography of who you are. I found myself cataloging memories, examining them for signs I had missed. The weekend 6 months ago when Mark claimed he needed to work on a big presentation and spent Saturday and most of Sunday at the office. The time 2 years ago when he had come home with a hickey on his neck that he explained away as a bruise from carrying boxes. The gradual decrease in our physical intimacy, which I had attributed to age and stress, and the natural evolution of a long marriage. The way he had become more critical of my appearance, suggesting I might want to try a new hairstyle or lose a few pounds, while his own grooming standards had elevated. The new gym membership, the upgraded wardrobe, the attention to details that had never concerned him before. The next morning, while Mark was in the shower, I did something I had never done before. I picked up his phone from the nightstand, my hands trembling as I entered his passcode. Our wedding anniversary. How fitting. How grotesque. The water was still running in the bathroom. I could hear Mark's off-key humming, the same tune he always hummed in the shower, some song from his college days that he claimed reminded him of when life was simpler. The sound that used to make me smile now felt like a mockery, like evidence of how someone could be completely ordinary in some ways, while harboring extraordinary lies in others. The emails loaded slowly, each second stretching into eternity. My eyes scanned subject lines, sender names, searching for something, anything that would either confirm or dispel the growing dread. Business correspondence, spam, a message from his brother about a Knicks game, an email from the dry cleaner about his shirts being ready. Normal. Everything looked normal. I was about to put the phone down, feeling a mixture of relief and shame at having invaded his privacy when I saw it. An email from someone named Carla Jensen. The subject line read, "Can't wait for next month." My finger hovered over the message. The shower was still running. I could hear Mark's off-key humming, the sound that used to make me smile. I opened the email. The words blurred together at first, my brain refusing to process their meaning. Then they crystallized with terrible clarity. Last week was magical. I'm already counting down the days until our next getaway. The Fontainebleau holds such special memories now. I can't stop thinking about that sunset on the beach, the way you held me in the pool, the room service breakfast we never quite got around to eating. My vision tunneled. The phone screen swam in and out of focus. There was more, details I couldn't bear to read. Casual intimacy that spoke of familiarity and ongoing connection. The email was dated 3 days ago. It referenced plans for next month, which meant the cruise, which meant she would be there, which meant everything was so much worse than I had imagined. The phone nearly slipped from my shaking hands. I fumbled to return it to exactly the position I had found it, screen down, charging cable at the same angle. My legs carried me to the kitchen on autopilot. My mind a white noise of shock and rage and something that felt dangerously close to relief. At least I wasn't crazy. At least the wrongness I had sensed was real, substantial, provable. I stood at the kitchen window, staring out at our small garden where spring flowers were beginning to push through the soil, and felt something inside me shift and harden. The tulips Mark had planted for me 3 years ago were blooming, their red petals bright against the dark earth. I had loved those tulips, had seen them as evidence of his thoughtfulness, his love. Now they looked like lies growing in dirt, beautiful and meaningless. The woman who had swallowed her doubts, who had accepted easy explanations and prioritized peace over truth, began to recede. In her place, someone colder and more calculating started to emerge. I made coffee with steady hands, measuring the grounds with precision, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot with something approaching meditation. By the time Mark emerged from the shower, towel around his waist and smile on his face, I had made a decision. I would not confront him yet. I would not give him the opportunity to spin new lies, to manipulate and gaslight and make me doubt what I had seen. Instead, I would gather evidence. I would build a case. I would ensure that when the confrontation came, he would have no room to maneuver, no space to deny, no way to make this my fault or my imagination. "Coffee smells great," he said, kissing my cheek as he passed. His skin was warm and damp from the shower, smelling of the expensive body wash he had recently started using. I handed him a mug, watched him take that first grateful sip, and smiled. "We should start packing for the cruise today," I said, my voice perfectly normal. "I'm getting excited." The lie tasted like ash, but I delivered it smoothly, and Mark's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "Me too," he said. "It's going to be perfect. Just what we need. Just what we need." The phrase echoed in my mind as I turned back to my own coffee. What we needed was honesty. What we needed was respect. What we needed was a marriage built on truth rather than carefully constructed fiction. But that wasn't what we had, and possibly never had been what we had, and I was done pretending otherwise. The cruise ship's horn blasted as we prepared for departure from the Manhattan terminal, tourists crowding the decks with cameras and excitement. The pier was chaos, hundreds of passengers streaming up the gangways with luggage and anticipation, families with children, elderly couples holding hands, young people already dressed for vacation. The energy was infectious, everyone beginning their adventures, their escapes from ordinary life. Everyone except me. I was walking into the heart of my nightmare with a smile on my face and a plan in my mind. Mark stood beside me at the railing, his arm around my waist, playing the role of devoted husband with practiced ease. I leaned into him, matching his performance with my own, while my mind cataloged every inconsistency, every micro-expression, every tell I had been trained by love to ignore. The city skyline stretched before us, glittering in the late afternoon sun. Somewhere in that vast expanse of steel and glass and ambition, Carla Jensen existed, waiting for my husband to return from this charade of a romantic cruise with his wife. Or perhaps she was already on the ship, somewhere in this floating city of 3,000 passengers and crew, close enough to touch but invisible to me. The wife he had relegated to the role of convenient fiction, manageable obstacle, useful cover for his secret life. The ship's horn sounded again, deep and resonant, and I felt the vibration of the engines starting up, the slight movement as we began to pull away from the dock. Manhattan slowly receded, the familiar skyline becoming smaller, and I had the vertiginous sensation of leaving solid ground, of venturing into uncertain waters in more ways than one. When the concierge greeted Mark with such warmth, such recognition, I felt the final piece click into place. He had been on this cruise before. With her. The jewelry from Tiffany's, the Miami trip. All of it part of a parallel existence he had been constructing while I watered plants and made dinner and believed in our marriage. Have you ever felt your entire reality crack and reform in the space of a heartbeat? Have you ever stood on a ship deck holding champagne while your world capsized? The broken glass at my feet glittered like diamonds, and I thought about how appropriate that was. How fitting that this moment of shattering should be marked by something so sharp and expensive and ultimately fragile. The concierge's face when she realized her mistake was a study in professional horror. I watched the recognition dawn, watched her understand that she had just revealed something that was supposed to stay hidden, watched her calculate whether to attempt to recover or retreat. She chose retreat, backing away with murmured apologies about confusing passengers, about seeing so many faces. But the damage was done. The truth had been spoken, witnessed by a steward and several other passengers who were now looking at Mark and me with expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy. The spell had been broken. The performance had been interrupted by an unwitting member of the audience speaking a line that wasn't in the script. Mark guided me away from the concierge with efficient concern, murmuring something about jet lag and sensitivity to champagne. His hand on my back felt like a brand, like ownership, like the presumption of someone who believed his lies were architecture stable enough to support the weight of betrayal. We returned to our stateroom, a luxury suite with a balcony overlooking the endless blue of the Atlantic. The room was beautiful, decorated in soothing blues and creams, with a king-sized bed and elegant furniture, and a basket of chocolate-covered strawberries welcoming us. Romantic. Perfect. A stage set for a love story that existed only in my husband's delusional imagination. "Are you feeling all right, honey?" His face arranged itself into an expression of worry that I suddenly recognized as performance. How many of his expressions were real? How much of our marriage had been theater? I studied his face, this face I thought I knew better than my own, and saw a stranger's mask. The concerned husband, the attentive partner, the man who cared about my well-being. All roles he played convincingly, but roles nonetheless. "I'm fine," I heard myself say, my voice steady and distant. "Just need to lie down for a bit." I watched him leave, citing a need to explore the ship, to get his bearings. Getting his bearings. As if he hadn't navigated these corridors before with another woman on his arm. Getting his bearings. The phrase was almost funny. He knew exactly where everything was, had probably memorized the layout of the ship during his previous voyage with Carla. The restaurants, the bars, the quiet corners where lovers could meet, the schedule of activities and entertainment, the times when certain areas would be crowded or deserted. He wasn't exploring. He was probably meeting her, coordinating how they would manage this complicated dance of maintaining two relationships on the same ship. The logistics must have seemed thrilling to them. The danger of almost being caught adding spice to their affair. I felt sick thinking about it, about how my presence was probably just another element of excitement in their game. Alone in the stateroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it all. The humiliation, the rage, the grief for the life I thought we had. 23 years of marriage dissolving like sugar in water, leaving only bitter residue. I thought about our wedding day, the promises we had made in front of family and friends. I thought about the miscarriages, 3 of them, and how Mark had held me through the pain and loss. I thought about my mother's funeral 5 years ago, how Mark had written and delivered the eulogy when I was too devastated to speak. Were any of those moments real? Or had I been living with a sociopath capable of performing appropriate emotions without actually feeling them? Then I stood up, opened my laptop, and began to plan. I thought that cruise concierge's greeting was the lie that would unravel everything, but the receipt in his pocket and the email on his phone would prove it was only the tip of the iceberg. I created a new encrypted email account, using a service Mark wouldn't be able to trace. I began documenting everything with methodical precision, typing out a timeline of suspicious events, recording conversations in my phone's voice memo app, preparing to wage war with the only weapons I had, truth and evidence. Back in Brooklyn, Sarah answered her phone on the second ring. I could hear traffic in the background, the sounds of the city. She was probably walking somewhere, maybe to the bookstore she managed in Carroll Gardens, maybe just out for coffee. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. Every detail, every suspicion, every piece of evidence I had gathered. The receipt, the Miami trip, the email from Carla Jensen, the concierge's greeting. I spoke in a low voice, standing on the balcony where the ocean wind would make it impossible for anyone to eavesdrop, watching the wake of the ship spread behind us in white foam. She listened in silence until I finished, then her voice came through sharp and clear. "Linda, listen to me. You need to document everything. Photos, screenshots, witnesses. You need to protect yourself financially before he knows you know." Her words cut through my emotional fog with the precision of a knife. She was right. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about survival. About ensuring that when this marriage ended, I wouldn't be left with nothing but shattered trust and empty bank accounts. Sarah gave me practical advice born from her own experience with divorce, having helped her sister through a brutal split 3 years ago. Get copies of all financial records, check for accounts you don't know about, look at tax returns, credit card statements, investment portfolios. Men who cheat on their wives often cheat on their taxes and hide money. You need to know the full financial picture before you make any moves. I took notes, my hand cramping as I wrote, grateful for Sarah's clear thinking when my own mind felt wrapped in fog. The cruise continued its route south toward the Caribbean while I began my investigation in earnest. I befriended the staff, asking casual questions about the ship's routes and frequent passengers. The bartender at the pool deck bar, a cheerful man named Carlos from the Philippines, told me about the ship's regular cruises along this route, about passengers who came back multiple times, about the couples he had served drinks to over the years. I showed him a photo of Mark and asked casually if he looked familiar. Carlos studied it, his brow furrowing. Maybe? We see so many faces, you know. But I think yes. I think I served him before. With a lady with red hair? They always ordered the same drinks, champagne and vodka martini. Red hair. Carla had auburn hair in the photos I had seen on her LinkedIn profile. Not me, then, I said with a laugh that felt like broken glass in my throat. I'm blonde and I hate vodka. Carlos laughed too, moving on to serve other guests, unaware that he had just provided me with another piece of evidence. I went through Mark's belongings while he was at the gym or exploring the ship, photographing credit card statements, receipts, any scrap of evidence that might prove useful. The intimacy of searching through his things felt like a violation, which was ironic considering what he had been doing. His suitcase yielded a gold mine of information, receipts from restaurants I hadn't been to, a charge from the ship's jewelry store from what I could only assume was the previous cruise, a handwritten note tucked into the pages of the thriller novel he was reading. Last night was everything. I love you. C. The note was dated from 2 months ago. I photographed it from multiple angles, capturing every detail, then replaced it exactly where I had found it. I created a secret email account and forwarded everything to myself, building a digital fortress of truth that he couldn't charm or gaslight his way around. Each discovery felt like a small victory and a fresh wound. Dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants I had never visited. Charges from hotels during weekends he claimed to be at business conferences. A pattern of deception so thorough it must have required remarkable effort to maintain. I had to admit, in a horrible way, that I was almost impressed by the organizational skills required to manage such elaborate lies. Mark had always been good at his job, at managing complex portfolios and keeping multiple clients happy. Apparently, he had applied those same skills to managing multiple women. On the 3rd night of the cruise, Mark suggested we dress up for the formal dinner in the main dining room. The formal nights were one of the cruise line's signature features, an opportunity for passengers to dress in their finest and feel elegant for an evening. I wore the black dress I had bought specifically for this trip, a simple sheath that fit perfectly, applied makeup with a steady hand, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, someone who had learned to perform normalcy while plotting revenge. My eyes were hard, my smile sharp. I looked dangerous. I looked capable. I looked like someone who would not be defeated. We sat at a table with other couples, making small talk about their lives and travels. Our table mates were diverse. A pair of newlyweds still glowing with romantic optimism, an older couple from Texas celebrating their 40th anniversary, a professional couple from California discussing their busy careers. The conversation flowed easily, lubricated by wine and the general good mood that seemed to permeate formal night. Everyone was dressed beautifully, the women in gowns and jewelry, the men in suits and tuxedos. The dining room glittered with crystal and candlelight, servers moving gracefully between tables with elaborate dishes. One couple mentioned they were celebrating their 40th anniversary. "The secret," the husband said, raising his glass, is honesty. Complete, unwavering honesty. He gazed at his wife with such obvious adoration that I felt a physical pain in my chest. We made a pact early on. No secrets, no lies, not even little ones. And it's carried us through everything life has thrown at us. His wife nodded, her eyes moist with emotion. There were times when honesty was hard, she admitted. Times when the truth was uncomfortable or scary. But we never wavered from it, and I believe that foundation of trust has been what saved us. Mark clinked his glass against mine, smiled that smile, and I felt absolutely nothing. The paralysis had passed. In its place was a cold, crystalline clarity. "That's beautiful advice," Mark said smoothly. "Linda and I have always believed in honesty, too. It's the foundation of everything." I smiled and nodded, sipping my wine, while mentally calculating how much his lies had cost me. Not just financially, though that was significant, but emotionally, temporally. I had given him 23 years of my life. Years I could have spent with someone who actually valued me, or happily single, or building a different kind of life entirely. Those years were gone, stolen by his deception, unrecoverable. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever questioned whether your intuition was wisdom or paranoia? I spent so many nights lying awake, wondering if I was inventing problems, seeing patterns where none existed. But the evidence doesn't lie. Numbers and dates and receipts don't gaslight you. They sit in their stark truth and force you to acknowledge what you've been avoiding. And once you start really looking, once you commit to seeing clearly, the picture that emerges is often far worse than you imagined. I contacted a private investigator from the ship's internet cafe while Mark was at the casino. The ship had a business center with computers and surprisingly decent internet, though the connection was slow and expensive. The firm Sarah recommended specialized in infidelity cases, and the investigator, a woman named Patricia, listened to my story without judgment. Her voice over the phone was calm, professional, with a slight Boston accent that I found oddly comforting. She had heard variations of this story hundreds of times, had seen every kind of betrayal humanity could devise. Nothing shocked her. Nothing surprised her. "I need everything," I told her. "Financial records, phone logs, witnesses. I need to know the full scope of what he's been doing." She quoted me a price that made me wince, but I transferred the money from my personal account without hesitation. $5,000 for a comprehensive investigation, with the possibility of more depending on what she found. This was an investment in my future, in the truth that would set me free. Patricia promised to have preliminary findings by the time we returned to New York. She explained her methodology, how she would start with public records and work her way into phone records and financial databases, how she had contacts at various institutions who could expedite certain searches. It was all very professional, very thorough, slightly frightening in its efficiency. The technological barriers I faced were frustrating but not insurmountable. Mark had changed his phone password recently, but his laptop password remained the same. I spent hours late at night while he slept, scrolling through files and folders, downloading everything onto an external hard drive I had hidden in my cosmetics bag. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in the dark stateroom, giving everything a blue, ghostly quality. Mark slept soundly, snoring slightly, completely unaware that his wife was systematically gathering the evidence that would destroy him. I felt like a spy, like a detective, like someone competent and powerful in a way I hadn't felt in years. The cruise port in St. Thomas shimmered in the tropical heat as we disembarked for a day of shopping and beach activities. The island was beautiful, exactly like the postcards, with white sand beaches and turquoise water and lush green mountains rising in the background. The town near the port was a maze of duty-free shops selling jewelry, alcohol, perfume, all the things tourists apparently couldn't live without. The streets were crowded with passengers from multiple ships, everyone with the same slightly dazed look of people experiencing temporary freedom from their ordinary lives. Mark suggested we split up, claiming he wanted to find a surprise for me. "Why don't you do some shopping?" he said, pressing several $100 bills into my hand. "Get yourself something nice. I'll meet you back here in a couple of hours." His generosity would have been touching if I didn't know its true purpose. I watched him walk away, his white linen shirt bright against his tan, and followed at a distance. He didn't head toward the jewelry stores or boutiques. Instead, he made his way to a quiet cafe overlooking the harbor, where a woman with auburn hair and designer sunglasses was waiting. I stayed hidden behind a display of local artwork, my phone camera capturing their embrace, the way his hand lingered on her waist, the kiss that spoke of familiarity and intimacy. Carla Jensen, I presumed. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Younger than me by probably 10 years, well-dressed with that effortless style that comes from either natural talent or significant money. They sat at a table on the cafe terrace, leaning close together, his hand covering hers on the table. I zoomed in as much as I could without losing focus, capturing image after image. The way she laughed at something he said, the way he fed her a bite of his pastry, the casual intimacy of long-term lovers. So she was on the ship too, their affair playing out in parallel to our marriage. 2 tracks running side by side with Mark switching between them like someone changing radio stations. The logistics must have been complex, but probably not as difficult as I initially thought. She was probably in a different dining room for meals, in a different section of the ship. The ship was enormous, with multiple pools, restaurants, entertainment venues. 2 people could easily avoid each other if they wanted to. Or in this case, a man could easily keep 2 women from discovering each other if he was careful. And Mark had always been careful, organized, methodical. Qualities I had once found attractive now revealed as tools of deception. The photographs on my phone felt like weapons, like the smoking gun that would blast through any remaining doubt. I walked back to the ship alone, my mind racing with plans and contingencies. The sadness had transformed into something harder, more purposeful. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a woman with evidence, with resources, with a growing determination to ensure that Mark's betrayal would cost him everything. The heat was oppressive, the tropical sun beating down on the crowded streets, but I felt cold inside, ice cold, as if something fundamental in me had frozen and hardened. That night at dinner, Mark presented me with a delicate silver bracelet, aquamarine stones catching the candlelight. "I saw it and thought of you," he said, fastening it around my wrist. "The color reminded me of your eyes." The bracelet was beautiful, expensive, exactly my taste. He knew me well enough to choose something I would love, which somehow made it worse. I smiled and thanked him, while internally calculating whether this purchase would show up on the credit card statement I had already photographed. The psychological toll of maintaining this facade was exhausting, but I reminded myself that every day of performance was another day to gather evidence, to shore up my position, to prepare for the confrontation that was coming. "You may think you know someone," I thought, watching him butter his bread roll with the same precise movements he had performed for 23 years. But people are capable of remarkable deception when it serves their interests. The man sitting across from me, wearing his wedding ring and speaking words of affection, was a stranger wearing my husband's face. I studied him as if he were a specimen, trying to understand what made him capable of such sustained dishonesty. Was it sociopathy? Narcissism? Just ordinary selfishness elevated to an art form? I would probably never know. And I was learning that understanding his motivations mattered less than protecting myself from the consequences of his actions. Back in Brooklyn, Patricia's preliminary report arrived via encrypted email. I read it alone in the stateroom while Mark was at the gym, my laptop balanced on my knees, my hands shaking slightly as I scrolled through page after page of meticulously documented betrayal. The scope of Mark's betrayal was staggering. The affair with Carla had been ongoing for 3 years. 3 years of weekend getaways and expensive gifts and a network of lies so elaborate it required spreadsheet organization to track. Patricia had included an actual spreadsheet, color-coded and cross-referenced, showing trips, expenses, phone calls, emails. The level of detail was overwhelming and incredibly damning. But worse than the affair itself was the financial picture that emerged. Mark had been systematically moving money out of our joint accounts into separate accounts I hadn't known existed. He had taken out a second mortgage on our brownstone. He had borrowed against his retirement fund. All of it, Patricia believed, was in preparation for leaving me. The jewelry, the trips, the lifestyle he was funding for Carla had been financed by the dismantling of our shared financial security. He had stolen from our joint future to fund his separate present. The numbers made me physically nauseous. Over $300,000 had been moved or spent without my knowledge. I sat in Sarah's kitchen. The report spread between us, and felt a rage so pure it was almost transcendent. I had flown back to New York for one night, telling Mark I needed to handle an emergency with the brownstone, a convenient lie he had accepted without question. He was probably relieved to have more time with Carla without having to sneak around. Sarah poured us both wine, though it was barely noon, and we sat reading through the report together. "He was going to leave you with nothing," Sarah said quietly. "He was going to drain everything and disappear." The theft was somehow worse than the infidelity. The betrayal of trust was compound, layered, intentional. This wasn't just a man who had fallen in love with someone else. This was a man who had been calculating my destruction while kissing me goodnight. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over, becomes the foundation of who you become next. I contacted a divorce attorney that afternoon, one of the best in New York, and laid out everything I had discovered. Her name was Diane Rothschild, and her offices were in a sleek building in Midtown, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with gray hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing. She listened, made notes, and when I finished, she looked at me with something like admiration. "You've done excellent work," she said. "With this documentation, we can protect your assets and ensure he faces full consequences for his actions." The strategy we developed was methodical and ruthless. First, we would freeze the joint accounts and secure my portion of all marital assets. Second, we would file for divorce on grounds of adultery with extensive documentation. Third, we would ensure that Mark's professional reputation, built on the foundation of trust as a financial advisor, would crumble along with the marriage. Diane explained that financial advisors lived and died by their reputations, that trust was their only real product. A man who defrauded his own wife would find it difficult to attract or keep clients. "We're not just ending your marriage," Diane said with grim satisfaction. "We're ensuring he pays the full price for his choices." But beyond the legal maneuvering, I wanted something more visceral. I wanted public acknowledgement of his betrayal. I wanted the people who knew us as a couple, who had celebrated our wedding and attended our anniversary parties, to understand the truth. I wanted Mark to feel exposed, humiliated, stripped of the carefully constructed image he had maintained. Diane cautioned me about this impulse. "Public confrontation can feel satisfying in the moment," she said, "but it can also complicate the legal proceedings and make you look vindictive rather than wronged." But I didn't care. Some part of me needed the world to see what he had done, needed witnesses to my pain and his betrayal. Sarah suggested the venue. Mark's firm was hosting a major client appreciation event in 3 weeks at a gallery space in Chelsea. Partners, clients, colleagues, and their spouses would all be present. It would be the perfect setting for a very public reckoning. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah asked, squeezing my hand across her kitchen table. "Once you reveal everything publicly, there's no going back. You'll be permanently the woman who made a scene, who aired private business in public." I thought about the cruise concierge's face, about the photographs of Mark and Carla, about the financial devastation he had planned for me. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. He's been destroying me privately for 3 years. It's time to return the favor publicly. The preparations were intricate. I worked with a tech-savvy friend of Sarah's to create a presentation, a carefully edited compilation of evidence set to a soundtrack that would play on the gallery's projection system. Photographs from the cruise, screenshots of emails and text messages, credit card statements showing the pattern of deception. The presentation was elegant, professional, undeniable. We chose a soundtrack that was melancholic but not melodramatic, images that told the story clearly without needing excessive explanation. I practiced what I would say, rehearsed my delivery until the words felt like armor. I informed my attorney of the plan, who cautioned me about potential legal ramifications, but ultimately couldn't prevent me from speaking my own truth in a public venue. The psychological toll of pretending normalcy around Mark while orchestrating his exposure was immense. Every morning I woke up next to him, made coffee, asked about his day, and maintained the fiction of our marriage. But the tension only fueled my determination. This was my masquerade, my performance as the unsuspecting wife, while beneath the surface I prepared for war. I was getting good at lying, I realized. Mark had taught me well. The thought made me sad for a moment before I pushed the emotion away. There would be time for grief later. Now was the time for action. The gallery space in Chelsea glowed with warm lighting and carefully curated artwork when we arrived. Mark's hand rested on the small of my back as he guided me through the crowd, introducing me to clients and colleagues with practiced charm. The gallery was beautiful. White walls displaying abstract art that probably cost more than my car. Waiters circulating with champagne and canapes. Everything elegant and sophisticated. I smiled, shook hands, made appropriate small talk about the economy and real estate and summer vacation plans. Sarah circulated nearby, positioned as we had planned, ready to capture reactions on her phone. The gallery owner, a friend of Sarah's, had agreed to help, ensuring that the presentation would play at precisely 9 o'clock when the speeches were scheduled to begin. Mark's managing partner took the microphone first, thanking everyone for their continued business and loyalty. He spoke for about 10 minutes, discussing the firm's excellent year, recognizing top performers, making jokes that landed well with the crowd. Then, Mark was called up, expected to give a toast to the firm's success. He accepted the microphone with that charming smile, began speaking about trust and partnership, and the importance of relationships in business. His speech was smooth, well-delivered, emphasizing how relationships were the foundation of everything they did. The irony was almost unbearable. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, adrenaline flooding my system. This was the moment. Everything I had planned, all the evidence I had gathered, was about to detonate like a bomb in the center of his perfect presentation. The lights dimmed slightly as the presentation was supposed to begin, showcasing the firm's achievements for the year. Instead, my carefully crafted compilation began to play on the large screen behind Mark. The first image was of Mark and Carla embracing at the St. Thomas Cafe, his wedding ring visible on the hand that rested on her waist. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Mark spun around, his face draining of color as he saw what was being displayed. "What is this?" he stammered into the microphone. "Turn it off." But the presentation continued. Image after image, email after email. A chronological documentation of 3 years of systematic betrayal. I walked toward the front of the room, my heels clicking against the polished floor in the sudden silence. Someone handed me a second microphone. I took it, my hands surprisingly steady, and addressed the crowd. "Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Linda Reynolds, Mark's wife of 23 years. I'm interrupting this celebration to share some important information about the man you trust with your financial futures." My voice was clear, cold, projecting across the stunned silence. What you're seeing on this screen is evidence of an extensive affair my husband has been conducting while simultaneously draining our joint accounts and committing financial fraud to fund his second life. These aren't just the actions of an unfaithful spouse, They're the actions of someone who built his career on trust while systematically betraying everyone in his personal life. The screen behind me continued its damning slideshow as I spoke. Credit card statements showing charges to luxury hotels during supposed business trips. Text messages discussing how to hide transactions from me. The photograph of the Tiffany's receipt and the corresponding image of Carla wearing the necklace that my money had purchased. Mark tried to grab the microphone from my hand, but I stepped back, and several people in the crowd moved to block him. His face had gone from pale to red, fury and humiliation warring across his features. "You can't do this," he hissed. "You're destroying everything." I looked at him, this man I had loved for more than 2 decades, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "You destroyed everything," I said, my voice still amplified by the microphone. 3 years ago, when you decided your marriage vows were negotiable, when you decided to steal from our joint accounts to fund your affair, when you decided I was so stupid, so blind, so easily manipulated that you could get away with it indefinitely. You may have fooled me for years, but you can't fool the truth. And the truth is that you're a liar, a cheat, and a fraud. The final slide was a simple message in bold letters. Trust your intuition. It knows the truth even when you don't. The room remained frozen in shocked silence for a long moment. Then the whispers started, building into a low roar of conversation. Mark's managing partner approached, his face grim, his hand firm on Mark's shoulder. "We need to talk, Mark. Now." Clients began moving away from Mark, some approaching me with expressions of sympathy and outrage on his behalf directed at him, not me. Sarah appeared at my elbow, steadying me as the adrenaline began to wear off and my legs started to shake. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." And I had. I had burned it all down, and it felt glorious. The aftermath unfolded with the inexorable logic of consequences. Mark's firm launched an immediate internal investigation into his financial dealings, particularly concerned about whether he had misappropriated client funds. Within days, he was placed on administrative leave. The story spread through our social circle with the speed of scandal, each retelling adding new layers of shocked commentary. Mark's professional reputation, built over decades of careful image management, crumbled in the face of undeniable evidence. His brother called me, apologizing profusely. "I had no idea," he said, his voice thick with shame. "All those times I defended him, told you that you were lucky to have such a devoted husband. I feel sick." I accepted his apology with grace, but I also made sure he understood the full scope of what Mark had done. The people who had enabled his behavior through willful ignorance or misplaced loyalty needed to face their own complicity. The legal divorce proceedings moved forward with brutal efficiency. My attorney filed motions to freeze all of Mark's accounts and assets, to recover the money he had moved into hidden accounts, to ensure that I received my full share of our marital property. Mark hired an expensive lawyer who tried various tactics, from painting me as unstable to suggesting that my public exposure of his affair constituted harassment. But the evidence was too overwhelming, too meticulously documented. Every attempt he made to manipulate the narrative crashed against the wall of truth I had constructed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed the financial records with visible disgust. "Mr. Reynolds," she said during one hearing, "you have engaged in a pattern of financial fraud against your spouse that rises to the level of criminal behavior. You're fortunate that Mrs. Reynolds has chosen not to pursue criminal charges at this time." Mark tried to apologize, tried to explain, tried to beg for forgiveness. He showed up at Sarah's apartment where I was staying, flowers in hand, tears streaming down his face. "Please, Linda, I made mistakes. I was confused. I still love you. We can work through this." I looked at him through the doorway, this man who had shared my bed and my life and my trust, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering affection, just a vast emptiness where love used to live. The time for working through things was before you spent 3 years systematically betraying me, I said quietly. What you're feeling now isn't remorse. It's regret that you got caught. There's a difference. I closed the door in his face and never looked back. Carla Jensen, I learned through the investigation, had been fed her own set of lies. Mark had told her that our marriage was already over, that we were living separate lives, that the divorce was imminent. She had believed herself to be his future, not his affair. When confronted with the truth of his duplicity, she apparently ended things immediately, sending him a scathing message that my private investigator managed to obtain. "You're a coward and a liar," she wrote. "I hope she takes you for everything." I felt a strange kinship with this woman I had never met, both of us victims of Mark's capacity for deception. The ability to compartmentalize, to maintain two entirely separate narratives, required a level of dishonesty that went beyond simple infidelity into something darker and more pathological. The brownstone became mine in the divorce settlement, along with half of Mark's retirement funds and a substantial portion of his assets. The judge ordered him to reimburse me for all the money he had moved out of our joint accounts to fund his affair. He was left with enough to survive, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle he had been building with Carla. His professional life continued its downward spiral. The firm's investigation revealed that while he hadn't directly stolen client funds, he had engaged in questionable practices that violated ethics guidelines. They terminated his partnership. His professional license came under review by the state board. The man who had built his identity on financial success and professional respect found himself unemployed and unemployable. His reputation shattered beyond repair. I wish I could say I felt guilty about the destruction of his life, but I didn't. He had been prepared to do the same to me, after all, just more quietly and with plausible deniability. The only difference was that I had discovered his plans before he could execute them and had chosen to fight back publicly rather than suffer in private. There's a certain poetic justice in that, I think. The consequences he faced were the direct result of his own choices, his own deceptions. I was simply the mirror that reflected his actions back at him, magnified for all to see. 6 months after the gallery confrontation, I stood in my bedroom, packing for a trip. Not a cruise this time, but a solo journey to Italy that I had always dreamed about but never taken because Mark claimed to be too busy with work. The brownstone felt different now, lighter somehow, as if Mark's presence had been a weight I hadn't fully recognized while carrying it. I had repainted the walls in colors I actually liked, replaced furniture that bore too many memories, created a space that was entirely mine. Sarah knocked on the doorframe, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," she said, handing me one. We clinked glasses, and I felt something that had been frozen for so long begin to thaw. Not forgiveness for Mark, never that, but a letting go of the anger that had sustained me through the divorce. I was ready to be something other than his victim or his adversary. I was ready to simply be myself. The transformation I underwent wasn't instantaneous or magical. There were nights I cried for the life I had lost, for the 23 years that felt wasted, for the version of myself who had trusted so completely. There were moments of crushing loneliness, of doubt about whether I had made the right choices in how I handled the confrontation. But slowly, painfully, I rebuilt myself into someone stronger and more authentic. I started attending therapy, working through the ways I had ignored my intuition, the patterns of conflict avoidance and people-pleasing that had made me vulnerable to manipulation. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with over the years, joined a book club, took art classes in Williamsburg. I discovered parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of being Mark's wife, parts I had forgotten existed. I also began speaking at support groups for women dealing with infidelity and financial abuse. Sharing my story, offering the wisdom I had gained through my experience, felt like a way to transform the pain into something useful. The questions people asked were always similar. How did you know? How did you find the courage? How did you start over? My answers were honest, sometimes uncomfortably so. I told them about the receipt, about the concierge, about the small voice I had trained myself to ignore. I told them about the fear and the doubt and the moments when I almost gave up. But I also told them about the power that comes from seeing clearly, from refusing to accept lies, from choosing yourself even when it's hard. One evening, I was invited to speak at a women's center in Manhattan. The room was full of women at various stages of their own journeys, some still married and suspicious, others newly divorced and reeling, others years past their betrayals and building new lives. I told my story again, from the cruise deck to the gallery confrontation, to the quiet rebuilding that followed. When I finished, a young woman in her 30s raised her hand. "How do you trust again?" she asked. "How do you open yourself up to love after something like that?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust romantic love again," I said honestly. "Maybe I never will be. But I've learned to trust myself, to trust my intuition, to trust that I can survive whatever comes. And that feels like enough for now." The wisdom I gained from this experience isn't comfortable or simple. It's this: we teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to tolerate. Every time I accepted Mark's easy explanations, every time I swallowed my doubts to keep the peace, I was training him to believe he could lie to me without consequences. The signs of financial abuse and emotional manipulation were present from the beginning. I just didn't have the framework to recognize them. The unexplained charges, the defensive reactions to simple questions, the way he made me feel crazy for trusting my own perceptions, these are all classic patterns. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, please understand, your intuition is not paranoia. Your questions are not accusations. Wanting transparency in your relationship is not controlling or unreasonable. If you find yourself in a similar situation, here's my advice. Document everything. Screenshots, photographs, copies of financial statements. Create a paper trail that can't be denied or gaslit away. Consult with a divorce attorney before you confront your partner. Ensure your assets are protected. Build a support system of people who will believe you and stand by you when things get hard. And most importantly, trust yourself. Trust what you know, what you see, what you feel. You are not crazy. You are not imagining things. You deserve a partner who treats you with honesty and respect. And if you're not getting that, you deserve to walk away. The psychological dynamics of what Mark did go beyond simple infidelity. He engaged in a form of financial abuse, systematically controlling and depleting our shared resources while building a separate financial life. He used gaslighting techniques to make me doubt my own perceptions and memories. He demonstrated narcissistic traits, viewing me as an object to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. These patterns are common in relationships where one partner is being systematically betrayed, and they're designed to keep the victim confused, dependent, and unable to leave. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for anyone who wants to protect themselves or help someone they love who might be experiencing similar treatment. Today, I live in Williamsburg in a renovated loft with exposed brick and massive windows overlooking the East River. I work as a consultant for a nonprofit that helps women leaving abusive relationships, using my business degree and life experience to help others achieve financial independence. I have friendships that are deep and authentic, built on mutual respect rather than social convenience. I travel when I want, eat what I like, decorate my space to reflect my actual taste. I am, for the first time in decades, completely myself. Is it lonely sometimes? Yes. Do I miss the comfort of partnership, of having someone to share my days with? Sometimes. But I never, not for one single moment, miss the specific partnership I had with Mark. That relationship, built on lies and maintained through manipulation, was lonelier than any solitude I experience now. The cruise ship story. The moment when the concierge said welcome back and shattered my world. feels both distant and immediate. I can still feel the texture of that moment, the way time seemed to slow down and crystallize around a single truth. Part of me wishes I could go back and warn the woman I was, prepare her for what was coming. But another part of me understands that she had to discover it in her own time, had to gather her own evidence, had to make her own choice about how to respond. We become who we need to be through the challenges we face. The Linda who stood frozen on that deck couldn't have survived what was coming. But the Linda who planned and executed that gallery confrontation, she could survive anything. So here's my question for you. Wherever you are, whatever time it is as you listen to this story, if you found that receipt, if you heard that greeting, if you felt that first crack in the foundation of your trust, what would you do? Would you ask the hard questions even knowing the answers might destroy everything? Would you gather evidence, build your case, protect yourself? Or would you look away, choose to believe, preserve the peace at any cost? There's no judgment in this question. We all do what we need to do to survive. But I'll tell you what I learned. The cost of truth, no matter how painful, is always less than the cost of living a lie. The temporary destruction of confronting betrayal is nothing compared to the slow erosion of denying it. And the power that comes from choosing yourself, from refusing to be gaslit or manipulated or diminished, that power is worth any amount of temporary pain. I think about Mark sometimes, wonder where he is and what his life looks like now. The last I heard, he was living in a small apartment in Queens, working in sales for a financial services company after his license was reinstated with restrictions. The woman who was his wife for 23 years feels compassion for any human suffering, even his. But the woman I've become doesn't regret the choices she made. Every decision, from hiring the private investigator to planning the gallery confrontation to walking away without looking back, was necessary for my survival and reconstruction. You may have fooled me, Mark, but you couldn't fool the truth. And the truth set me free. If this story resonated with you, if you see yourself in any part of my journey, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What city are you listening from? What time is it there? If you agree that we should always trust our intuition even when it's scary, give this video a like. Tell me, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have confronted him publicly or handled it privately? Did I go too far or not far enough? Your perspectives and experiences matter. They're part of the larger conversation about trust, betrayal, and how we rebuild after our worlds are shattered. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's questioning their own sanity in a relationship that doesn't feel right, share this with them. Sometimes we need permission to trust ourselves, and maybe this story can provide that. Before you go, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. There are so many more stories to share, so many experiences that deserve to be heard and validated. I have 2 other videos I think you might find interesting. One is about a woman who discovered her best friend was having an affair with her husband and how that double betrayal led to an unexpected alliance. The other is about recognizing the early signs of financial abuse in relationships. Both are powerful stories of women who chose themselves and survived. You'll see those videos suggested on your screen now. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Trust your intuition. It knows the truth even when you don't. And remember, you are not crazy. You are not imagining things. You are not alone. Whatever storm you're navigating, whatever truth you're facing, you have the strength to survive it and build something better on the other side. I'm proof of that. Thank you for listening.